kids learn one thing, that soil is alive. If every kid can graduate from high school knowing that fact and appreciating that fact, I think that would transform decision-making for the rest of history.
Welcome back to Educator University. Teachers and farmers have more in common than you'd think. Both nurture, grow, shape the future, and thrive on real connection. Today's guest, Ron Nichols, is an Emmy-winning writer and communications expert with the Soil Health Academy. He works with regenerative farmers to share how they're rebuilding soil, restoring ecosystems, and rethinking the way we grow food. In this episode, Ron shares how teachers can use storytelling to inspire students' passion for farming and sustainability. Welcome, Ron.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I think just starting off, we want to ask the question, why is regenerative farming so important and what is it?
Well, a good definition of regenerative agriculture is farming and ranching in synchrony with nature to repair, rebuild, and restore ecosystem functions, starting with all life and then expanding to all life above the soil. Now, what that means essentially is for years, many people have thought that soil is an inert growing medium, right? It's sand, silt, and clay. We know that. But that's just part of the story. The real powerhouse of soil lies in its life, the microorganisms that empower all terrestrial life. And what regenerative agriculture does is it mimics the processes that nature has evolved and created over the millennium. It uses the processes to restore that life. If I can take you on a brief detour as to how we got here. So regenerative agriculture is sort of coming to the forefront in news, but it's because we got ourselves into a particularly difficult situation in terms of farming over the years. And it started really at the end of World War II. And that process led to there was a guy by the name of Fritz Haber. He was a German chemist, and in the early 20th century is credited with connecting and realizing that ammonium nitrate could be used as a fertilizer in promoting plant growth. Well, it was also used as an oxidizer in building bombs for World War II. And at the end of World War II, you don't need any more bombs, but you have this stockpile of ammonium nitrate, and what do you do with it? And the convenient solution was, well, let's apply it to our crops because we can grow more of them with this. That sort of philosophy, along with this notion that we need to be more efficient in our food production, right? So in the way that most people think about efficiency, it's like, okay, well, then just grow one thing, right? Grow monocultures. Do one thing well. Let's be as efficient as we can, use mechanical means to accelerate the processes, to do all of those kinds of things. And we essentially turned our farms into factories. And in that process, we removed the biology. We have been removing the biology for decades, and that's causing some problems that we can talk about a little bit later if you want. But what regenerative agriculture does really is it helps to restore the life in the soil, and through the restoration of that life, you have a restoration of ecosystem function, which redounds to all kinds of good things happening. You get biological diversity, you get cleaner water, you get healthier plants and animals and food. And so what we've been trying to do in the organizations that I work with is to go back to regenerative agriculture is nothing new. Essentially what we're doing is we're saying, let's just use the processes that nature has perfected over millions of years, and let's use those processes to help us grow better food and to sink more carbon into the soil and to restore essentially ecosystem function. One of the things that we like to say is, and that happens is, for example, nature doesn't typically grow a monoculture. It abhors monocultures. It really wants diversity. It doesn't, in nature, there is no such thing as a plow. Right. And yet we've introduced these things. And so what we're trying to do is get farmers to step back from that industrialized way of thinking and saying, you can grow more food, you can grow better food, you can grow healthier food by using these principles. And they're pretty simple principles. There are five of them that we can get into again a little bit later, but it's really just a matter of, because if you ask yourself the question, well, what did we do before we had synthetic fertilizers? What did we do before we had pesticides? We seem to evolve okay as a species. We seem to come through that okay. So why are we so reliant upon these synthetic inputs now? And what impact are those synthetic inputs having, not just on the land and to our water? And there are many hypoxic zones in the Gulf of Mexico, for example, nitrate issues with drinking water in the Midwest, for example. But what does it mean to our health? And we can see a correlation, I think, if you look at the rise of autoimmune diseases that correspond to industrial agriculture use. Is it causal? Who knows? We'll let the academics debate that ad infinitum. But is it corollary? Yeah. And I guess most of us in this space say, until we have the answers, why take the risk? If there is a better way to do it, if there's a more profitable way to do it for farmers so that they're not spending so much money on these inputs, and if it makes farming fun again, which I talk to a lot of farmers and they're just so much happier as regenerative farmers instead of sitting on a tractor all day, being around these chemicals. They don't want their farm workers around those chemicals. They don't want their families around those chemicals, and they don't want to be around those chemicals. But we've been led to believe that they're necessary, and nature begs to differ.
Yeah, it's almost like going back to basics in a way, going back to what we used to do in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. You go back and you look Thomas Jefferson's journals on gardening, right? We learned a lot of things. They understood the importance of crop rotations. They understood the importance of biodiversity in disrupting pest cycles. And so it's as though it's like, wow, well, nature already figured this out. Why do we need to be injecting these chemicals to do these kinds of things? And it's not easy, and it requires a change of mindset, and it requires a little bit of a leap of faith, because right now there are only about 5 to 8% of the farmers out there have fully embraced regenerative agricultural principles. And I've interviewed a lot of them. I've talked to them. I've been to their farms and their ranches. And it's interesting. At the conclusion of every interview, I always ask the question, would you go back? Would you go back to conventional agriculture? And I have yet to find a farmer who told me that he or she would. Usually it's more along the lines, if I had to go back to the conventional way of farming, I'd just quit. But now, and because there is more joy in growing life than there is in destroying it. And one of my mentors in this process is a farmer, and he's the co-founder of the Soil Health Academy. His name is Gabe Brown. And one of my first interviews with him, I remember him saying he used to get up every morning wondering what he was going to kill that day as a farmer, right? Was it a pest? Was it a virus? He was going to kill something. He says, and now he gets up and he says, where am I going to grow life? And to see that transformation and then to be willing to share it with so many other farmers as part of this regenerative revolution, it's really inspiring. And to see the life that can be grown out there if given a chance, it's exciting for me.
I think as teachers too, we kind of like that same idea, getting up in the morning and helping students, right? We want to come into that same idea of we're not going there to put out fires, but to create a love for learning. And I think that we have a similar perspective in that too in our job.
And that's part of the fun of regenerative agriculture that for myself personally, and also that I've heard from farmers that I've interviewed. Just the notion that soil is alive, and just some things that I didn't realize. I've always gardened and one generation removed from the farm, but I didn't really even understand the elegant symbiosis and mutualism that's happening beneath our feet. And it is a misunderstood or completely unknown ecosystem because it's difficult to study, right? A lot of the study would have to happen with an electron microscope. When you remove those microorganisms from their environment, they tend to die. So you can't really observe them interacting. You have to infer a lot. So hats off to all of the researchers out there who can figure out a way to unlock those secrets in the soil. But I didn't know, for example, that when you put fertilizer on the ground in your garden, that it's not just like the plants can uptake those nutrients. Maybe I was a slow learner, but it just seemed like, hey, you apply this, and so it's got to be like a straw, right? They're sucking those nutrients up, and now my plants are all pretty and doing well. I didn't realize the role that biology played in making those nutrients available to the plant. And then I also discovered later that it's not just a one-way exchange. It's not just that the biology is making nutrients available to the plants, but those plants are so reliant on those nutrients and that they actually exchange carbon stores in their plant and exudates into the soil to attract more microorganisms around the rhizosphere to both protect the plant and to deliver those nutrients that those plants have come to rely upon. So it's an exchange, it's a carbon exchange. It's like that's the currency that goes on underground. It's the currency of life. And I think just I get giddy a little bit with just how elegant that exchange is and how beautiful it is. And along comes industrial agriculture, and we say we've got a better way, right? We take that life out of the ground. And worse, we destroy the environment that enable this magnificent process to occur. We destroy it by plowing it. I used to rototill my garden until I realized that I am destroying the habitat of the microorganisms that will feed my plants and protect my plants. Even things such as, again, Annie, if I get too geeky, cut me off, but even just this, I had no idea that microorganisms created biotic glues to aggregate soil clumps together in such a way that it enables better soil function. So in other words, it's like they're down there and they built their own house and they're protecting their house and they're doing all the stuff that will allow water to infiltrate, which, by the way, it allows for more resiliency in our land and our food production, right? Instead of that water running off and carrying with it glyphosate and other chemicals, it actually goes into the soil. It feeds that soil ecosystem and all is happy. And then along comes man, and we say, nope, we're going to plow that. We're going to rip through that, and we're going to break all those those biotic glues together and those clumps together. And incidentally, we're also in the process also ripping out all the mycorrhizal fungi that connect these plants and provide all of these other benefits. And it gives us I like to call it sort of a production high. You go in and you plow it. And I used to think plowing was a good thing because we get rid of the weeds, right? We don't want weeds. We want to just focus on those plants. And here we have what we're essentially doing is setting nature back. And you get this release of carbon when you do that, right? And unfortunately, a good deal of that carbon goes back into the atmosphere instead of staying in the soil where it can go to work for plants. And so when you release this carbon, yeah, you do get a little initial bump in yield because those solubilized nutrients are there for the plants to uptake. But now you've taken out the biology that could continue to supply them. So you get that initial bump in yield. And then suddenly what happens when you plow something and you pulverize the soil, it allows for a little while plants can come up through that and they grow because there's enough aggregation for the plants to come up through. But the first rain event, what happens? And the second rain event, what happens? Then you start basically crusting the soil and you make it more like concrete than aggregated soil. So after a short period of time, the soil will crust over and water will not be able to infiltrate. And worse, a lot of the seedlings can't come up through that crusted soil either. So you set into motion this sort of chain reaction of bad things that can happen by not farming in nature's image, really, because nature doesn't plow. The other thing that happens, and if you've ever done this, if you've ever had and I'm sure you have as a gardener, if you till and it's all clean and it looks pristine, and if you don't plant anything in it, what happens after a period of time?
Kind of just starts growing things, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's magic, right? So
Yeah.
what nature is doing in that moment, it's trying to heal itself. It's going to put roots in the ground to feed biology, to provide that progression of succession, and that will allow more and more plants to thrive, right? And it's not going to be a single species that you get in that either. You'll get all
No.
kinds of stuff, right?
I actually so we have in the back right now a cherry tree, and I got a cherry tree a couple of years I didn't plant this one spot, and I think I got a tree sapling coming up, and I'm just like, "Really?" It's just coming out of the ground. I didn't plant it or anything.
It is
Yeah,
amazing what nature and where did those seeds come from? They didn't just come from the air.
yeah,
Sometimes there's a latent seed bed that's there, and so
yeah,
these seeds, nature's just so remarkable because
yeah,
they can lay sort of inert there for hundreds of years, and then when it has an opportunity, when the conditions are just right, it springs to life, but it's healing. So, really, what regenerative agriculture then focuses on are those kinds of principles, right? We limit soil disturbance by using no-till planters, for example. One of the questions I get from folks who aren't in the agriculture space, if I go to speak to a Rotary Club or whatever, they say, well, how do you plant without plowing? And on a landscapes scale, it's called a no-till drill. So it's more instead of disking up the ground and then going in and planting behind it, what a no-till drill does is it basically you drive over plant residue from the previous crop or cover crop, and it cuts a slice into the soil. And then into that slice that would go about 3 inches deep, it will deposit a seed, whether it's corn, soybean, wheat, whatever that particular is. And then behind that dropping of the soil, then it's got a couple of rollers that come over and it closes that slit in the soil. So you're disturbing the soil, but just a very little. You're not exposing it. You're keeping the plant residue there. So we want to limit soil disturbance. We want to keep the soil covered with plants and plant residues as much as possible. That really helps protect. Yeah, that's kind of the roof of the house for the soil microorganisms, right? If you have a leaky roof, if you've ever had one in your house, it's not a good thing. It makes for uncomfortable living. And it's the same thing that happens in farming or in nature. So you keep plant residues on there, keeps the soil temperatures from moderating, or it helps moderate soil temperatures so that you don't get extremes, right? If you have a soil that's uncovered versus soil that is covered with something growing, the temperature extremes can be remarkable. And if you have to remember that soil microorganisms are living and they can't live above certain temperatures. They will die if the soil temperature gets too high, just like we do. And they're more resilient than we are. So we like to keep plants covered. And of course, we encourage diversity as much as possible, whether that's with cover crops or plant rotations or companion cropping, where you might plant things together, or two different species, two or three different species. You rotate crops a lot, have a lot of different crop rotations. We encourage integrating animals into for farmers. Not everybody likes to necessarily grow animals, but it's really nature, soil, plants, and animals evolve together. And when we, as in our infinite wisdom and in the pursuit of efficiency, we decided to remove the plants or remove the animals from the equation. And in doing so, we removed the processes that they evolved to bring into that ecosystem, right? A cow that grazes grass, for example, leaves something behind, right? It has already processed a lot of those nutrients and it's deposits that in the form of manure and urine that, guess what? Soil microorganisms. Well, first, the organisms on top of the soil can help break that down, whether they're dung beetles or worms or flies or whatever they might be. And then those nutrients eventually get into the soil and enrich the plants. That in turn would feed the cattle. It's a beautiful system. I mean, nature has it is a perfect production model, but we thought we could do it better, and now we're paying the price for that hubris.
And I think as teachers, what you're saying about regenerative farming, a lot of teachers are listening and saying, yes, I think this is a better way to farm. And I want my students to be excited about this. I want them to learn about regenerative farming. How do you share regenerative farming in a way that is engaging for students, that makes them have the passion that you have?
That's a really good question. And that's the kind of question that keeps me up at night, because as a communicator trying to encourage more farmers to do this, I have to talk a lot about the bottom line. We can't really have an honest discussion about the viability of regenerative agriculture as a business model unless it inks out, right? It's got to be a profitable thing for farmers to be able to do. And we can make that case. We can make that case by reducing the amount of inputs that are needed because fertilizer prices aren't going down. We can reduce the amount of pesticides and herbicides that have to be used. We can say and show and demonstrate how regenerative farming allows for more land resiliency and therefore gives you the ability to withstand weather extremes. There's quite the debate as to whether or not is it climate change. I think it is, but you can talk to farmers and they can tell you that weather events are more extreme. The periods of drought are more protracted. When they get rain events, they tend to be more intense, and we need to make our land more resilient to deal with that. We can make the case through eh, through through regenerative agriculture. We try to do case studies. Principally, though, I use as many farmers to tell the story as I can. They have the credibility with their peers to be able to say, "Hey, I was there with you. I was skeptical too, and now I'd never go back."
Do you find that farmers enjoy going into the classroom? Is there kind of connections that you've seen in your experience where they're getting students excited about this work with their own knowledge?
For sure. And I think that's an underutilized resource. I think, and there are organizations out there that can help connect farmers with classrooms and vice versa. Some of these farmers actually will have, if you can do it, bring the kids to the farm and have a really meaningful experience. But there are soil and water conservation districts that are in every county in the country. There are statewide and local soil health coalitions and soil health organizations that can also bring resources to the classroom. So look those up, just do a little Google search. They can bring things like a rainfall simulator and show kids. Those are really eye-opening. We also have another one, and these are eye-opening for farmers as well. These demonstrations, we also have one called, it's called a slake test or an aggregate stability test, which sounds super boring, but it's really just taking a clump of soil, topsoil, from a conventionally managed piece of farmland where they use pesticides, herbicides, synthetic fertilizers, plowing, and then bring the same size clump of soil from a regenerative farm where they use crop rotations and diverse plants and animals. And you can just see the difference in terms of the color. You can see the difference in terms of aggregation. Which one do you think would be easier for a plant to get its roots through? Right? Not to mention what yummy things are in it for the plant to uptake. But
Yeah.
then you put those two different clumps in water and watch what happens to those clumps. As an old school gardener, I used to think, well, if it starts to break down, that's probably good, right? If it starts to, the water beneath this clump that's in the conventional agriculture will start to get muddy. It'll start to break down. The clump that's raised that was in regenerative field doesn't break down. The water goes into the soil, but the biotic glues that those microorganisms created, they hold that soil together. And so it can absorb that water, whereas the conventional, all of a sudden, it can't hold the water. And so it just breaks down the soil. And guess what happens? In a field situation, all of that becomes runoff that goes into our lakes and our streams. And it's not just the dirty water that you're seeing in those fields, it's also carrying the chemicals that were applied. And that's why you get nitrate issues in, well, the city of Des Moines, I think, is up to 2 or 3 denitrification plants for their water supply. They're very expensive, and that nitrogen's coming from somewhere. So if you can keep those chemicals when you have to use them, if you can keep them on the ground and in the soil, they can be very effective and useful, but you don't want them running off. But I know that's a long-winded way to your question, but I think most farmers would, if they don't have the time uh, to necessarily come, they can certainly give you some resources. But I think most of them would really enjoy coming to a classroom and speaking. That is the one thing that I've learned about the people who are in this space. For a lot of businesses, if you have a production method that is advantageous to your bottom line, the last thing you want to do is share that with your competitor, right? You want to have a competitive advantage. The beautiful thing about this space is that most farmers who are regenerative are giving, and they want to share that knowledge and that experience to help other farmers understand and employ and be successful in the application of those principles as well.
And that is it's very similar to teaching in that I think, like I mentioned in the beginning, we're very similar. We like to nurture and grow because we're always sharing with teachers who are with us. Hey, take this, do this. Here's an idea for you. And we're not holding on to things. It's a very cooperative environment as well. So I think that's very similar.
Right.
Yeah.
Very, very similar. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And if we can get, one of the other things is I think as human beings, we also want to have a sense that what we're doing matters, and it never hurts if you feel appreciated for doing that. In my communications efforts, and a lot of it's focused on trying to convince farmers, but it's also focused on trying to educate consumers. Because if we're really going to change how we grow our food, it can't just be from the farmers changing on their side. I think consumers have to demand more, and the food processing companies can then demand more of their producers and say, yeah, we want you to implement these practices and these principles. And the organizations like the ones that I represent on the communication side, what they do, their purpose is to help farmers in that transition process, because it's not without challenges and it's not without risk, because nature is always changing, and we have been sold prescriptions in farming. We've also been sold prescriptions in our human health, right? Why change your diet if a pill can fix you faster? And that's kind of a similar situation to what we find in getting people to transition from industrial conventional agriculture to regenerative practices. They've been told over the decades that we've got the solution for you. Oh, by the way, it's going to cost you a little money. And then if this solution causes another problem, glyphosate's a perfect example, right? It comes in, it kills weeds. But over time, nature is always evolving. And guess what? There are glyphosate resistant weeds now. Same thing with pesticides. It'll kill everything. Yeah, it also kills the beneficial insects that kept the bad insects or the insects that were affecting your crop in check. So you come in and you killed them all, and guess what? Now you're even more vulnerable to attack. And what are you going to do when that happens? So it's, but it's a challenge to get farmers through that. And that's what these organizations help them to do through the experiences and advice of other farmers and ranchers, people who have been there.
I think one thing you've mentioned in your own education process with farmers or maybe with students as a whole is how important storytelling is. Can you talk about that a little bit and how you share the message in a really effective way?
Yeah, thank you. It is really letting the farmers, it's one of the easiest things I've ever done because you don't really have to write a script. You simply ask the question, how did you get here and why? And that question is, but I can't remember the CBS correspondent who used to, Steve Hartman, I think was his name. He had a segment on the CBS morning show on Sundays that was called Everybody Has a Story. And it was fascinating. He would just go in a phone book. I don't know if you remember this or not. And he'd just
I know.
he'd close his eyes and he'd go to a town and he'd put his finger on a telephone number back when we had telephone books. And he would call them, and whoever answered the phone, he'd go do a story on for national television. And the stories were amazing. And that's the same thing here with this. All of the stories are amazing. People come from different places for why they were doing it, how they got to the point. Some of the stories are health related. I have, in fact, in a new series that I'm producing called Destination Regeneration, which I'll provide the link for your listeners to go and watch. I hope they will. I tell the story. Well, he tells his own story, basically, of young ranchers' personal health journey. And this guy was 26, 27 years old and diagnosed with all of these autoimmune digestive health problems. And he went to the Mayo Clinic and they had him on all of this different stuff. And he said, there's got to be a better way. And he started changing his diet and the source of the food that he was getting. And he was able, and we talked to the doctor there at the Mayo Clinic about this miracle that happened. And then the rancher himself has the realization that the food that will make him well, he's not growing that on his own ranch. And that he realized that he needed to change the way that he was growing. So there are just so many different stories out there, people who had their backs against the wall and were going broke through the conventional agricultural model, and they just knew that they had to change. I will also say I'm just astounded by the courage and the resilience of these people that I've had the privilege of telling their stories, whether it's on video or through feature articles that I write about them, is the fact that they also have to overcome a lot of sociological resistance. So the farming community, it's kind of a tight-knit community that has a lot of history and tradition. And people don't want to stick out like a sore thumb and be doing something a whole lot different than their neighbors are doing, especially because it looks different, right? The clean, we'll call them clean, tilled fields that you see so often during the winter that have nothing growing on them. In conventional agriculture circles, that's considered good farming. But in regenerative agriculture circles, that's nausea inducing because you know that soil is exposed to the elements. You know that it's not good habitat for the soil microorganisms. And you know nature wants to be growing something there.
Yeah.
Nature will grow something there. It's telling you something, but we've decided to a better way. But if you have a field that's covered with cover crops that are a lot of diverse, different plant species, it looks ugly by the conventional sense, right? But in fact, it's very beautiful if you know how that's being translated below the ground and what that's going to enable and the life that it's going to enable. But still, it's hard for farmers to put up with that kind of, or not put up with, but endure sometimes the kind of, I don't know, they may be ridiculed in some circles for doing what they're doing. You're going to go broke. This looks terrible kind of thing. And so it takes a certain amount of courage to be able to stand up and buck that system.
And that's kind of what you're doing with your work is you're educating farmers and educating the consumer, which is also students as our future consumers, really. What are some first steps that a teacher could take to help their students to understand what this is about?
Well, and I guess I would take that to where we start with the farmer. And you would think that farmers because they make their living from the soil, would know so much about it, right? One of the first things we ask farmers to do is take a shovel. I just refer to it as dig a little, learn a lot. What is your soil telling you about your management, right? And so learning how to read the soil, what are you seeing? Are you seeing life there? Are you seeing something is now you could take a microscope and look for microscopic life, but just look at the macroorganisms, the earthworms, the different kinds of life that's there. Are you seeing a lot of earthworm channels there? Are you seeing? Does your soil look like chocolate cake, or does it look like kind of a brown rock? Right? Touch it, smell it. If you ever smell healthy soil, it smells almost euphoric. It smells earthy. It smells almost a little bit kind of sweet, but you just kind of want to take a deep breath of it and go, oh gosh, that smells so good. What is that? And that's because of life. That's what the life that's in that soil, and the soil organic matter is it's breaking down and providing nutrients. And then if you compare it to just soil that comes from a conventional system or even your own yard, right? If you just grow take a look, and the teachers can do this. Take a look, take a clump of soil from your yard where you grow a monoculture of grass, and compare that to perhaps a garden in which you grow a lot of different varieties of plants and hopefully have cover crops and that sort of thing. Compare the two. Just take a look, and nature's going to tell you something right there. A lot of times we would just say to farmers, which soil would you rather have? And the answer is always the same. I want that one. I want the one that's got the good stuff in it. Well, the good news is you can have it. We used to think, and I used to think, because I came from an agency, the Soil Conservation Service is the agency that I signed on with after I did my journalism stint. And we used to have this poster that says it takes 500 years to create a 1 inch of topsoil. And that was only partially true. Geomorphology would suggest that is true. To break that down from sand, silt, clay, that geologic process, right? But the biologic process accelerates that. So yeah, the base material, it might take 500 years, but the function of the soil is where it's at. One of the soil scientists, or one of the agronomists that I work with, used to say, soil without biology is just geology. It's the life. That's where it's at. And we can control that. We can encourage life. We can accelerate. We can take soil organic matter, and a lot of the people that I've interviewed have taken where soil organic matter, like in a normal prairie situation, natural would be 5 to 7%. Over time, we've whittled that down to, in some places, less than 2%. But through the use of these agronomic principles, regenerative principles, we can actually restore soil organic matter in a few years to those levels and even more. So there really is hope in healthy soil. You don't have to wait 500 years for nature to get around to it. You can really accelerate. You add animals into that situation where you have grazing animals, followed by, say, chickens in that rotation where you have pasture-raised chickens and you're moving them through a rotational grazing kind of situation. All of the good things that nature is providing, and all of the nutrient recycling that's going on there, that the plants then can uptake, is just going to accelerate that process. So in short, I would just encourage any teacher that you have out there, and I'm talking all the way up to, in fact, some of the worst university professors who have been indoctrinated into this way of thinking. Soil science classes, I sat through one and I was bored. The traditional soil science class is just boring. You add biology into that scenario, and you get a geek like me who can't shut up about how wonderful and mysterious this miracle is. So anything that we can do to, at the building blocks early on, teach kids that this isn't an inert substance. Stop thinking of soil as dirt and start thinking of it as life.
And that's a huge reframing because I think even sometimes as adults, we're like, kids, don't get dirty. Don't get your hands dirty. But like we're kind of saying, maybe we take a lesson and we say, let's get our hands dirty for this lesson. Let's get our hands in the soil. Let's feel those things.
100%. And the more that we
Yeah.
can connect the next generation of consumers to food, whether that's by uh, knowing your farmer or knowing a farmer and doing that, or growing a garden yourself, I think there's a connection. Yeah, I forgot who had, there's a quote that said, if you want a friend for a year, get married. Friend for 15 years, get a dog. If you want a friend for life, get a garden, grow a garden. And although I don't necessarily, I agree with the second one, not the first one. But anyway, there is a sense that, yeah, this connection with growing life and appreciation. I think we've lost a little bit of the art of appreciation. I just appreciate the miracle. And the more I discover, the more we realize we don't know about this miracle, right? I think the estimates are we probably have identified maybe 10% of the microorganisms in the soil, but 90% we don't know what they are. And what may elude us forever, we may never know what they are. We may never completely understand their function. But history suggests nature has them there for a reason. And that's what I think, if we can, the teachers who are out there at any grade level, if they can imbue a sense of wonder, a sense of awe, a sense of appreciation. What would any kinds of experiments that you can do in a garden where you, or hydroponically grown food versus food that's been grown in a regenerative garden? If you, I'm not a tomato eater, my wife is. I grow tomatoes. I like to think I'm pretty good at it, but she can't wait for our tomatoes to get ripe because she said there's no difference, but there's a huge difference in taste between what she gets in the store during the winter months and what comes out of our garden fresh.
Yes, I agree
There's
with
a
that.
reason for that. There's a taste reason. We're also learning that there's a health reason. There are health benefits to that too. We're studying researchers like Stephen Van Vliet at University of North Carolina, Fred Provenza, University of Utah, are all connecting these phytonutrients that are absent in most food that is grown conventionally, whether that be and food feedlot kinds of beef and pork, where they're not out on the pasture getting these additional nutrients. So what your food eats also translates to what we eat, right? And what role do those phytonutrients play in our health? There's increasing body of work that suggests that they're definitely beneficial.
And actually, as you're talking right now, I'm thinking in terms of schools and teachers and schools in general, how amazing would it be if we brought some of this fresh food to the students? Because I know they may not understand why it's so important unless they taste it. Once they taste it, they might be, oh, this tastes so much better. They might see that connection right away?
A-
Yeah.
Absolutely. And to get kids to thinking about which foods that they would rather eat, which kind of, or even if you watch things that documentaries like Kiss the Ground, for example, which is a kind of oversimplified explanation of the regenerative farming movement, but it's entertaining and it definitely makes a case for the benefits of regenerative farming versus conventional farming. And it spans the whole panoply of topics from health to environment to even civilizations. One of my favorite books is by David Montgomery, and it's called Dirt, The Erosion of Civilization. And he traces the fall of civilizations from Mesopotamia to the Roman Empire. And in each of those stories, and he cites others along the way, these were great, powerful civilizations that eventually could not feed themselves. They could not support themselves. So they collapsed because they didn't take care of the soil that took care of them.
So this is more than just a science lesson. This is potentially the future of the way we see things, the way we're experiencing life. Yeah.
Absolutely. The future of our species is really dependent upon how we take care of that resource. And it's all powered by this, like I said, this elegant relationship between photosynthesis, the plant, the animals that interact with that. But humans, we manage that. We've been given a big brain, and sometimes we get a little carried away with ourselves in terms of just what we can control. And I think the thing that I learn from most of my interactions and interviews with regenerative farmers is they appreciate that sense that they can't control everything, but that nature has the solutions if we just let it play out. So as teachers think about different ways that they can communicate through story, and I'm sure the folks who are listening to this are a lot more creative than I am in terms of translating that knowledge into soluble information for their audiences. I would again encourage folks to just come back to that very basic building block. If kids learn one thing, just starting in kindergarten or in first grade, that soil is alive and soil is necessary for all terrestrial life on the planet, I'd be happy.
Yeah.
It's like if every kid can graduate from high school knowing that fact and appreciating that fact, I think that would transform decision making for the rest of history.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think you mentioned before we got on this interview, you have a few things you could share with teachers in terms of resources for the younger ones you have already created.
Yeah, I've got a couple of different clients who are in this space and who recognize how important it is that we teach our children well. And the coloring book is called Micro Minis. Let's see, what's it called? I can't even remember. I wrote it and I can't even remember the title. But anyway, it's a story about Microbe, a soil microbe, and her interactions with the plants and her friends who also share this space. And it's simplified, but it's scientifically accurate. These are the kinds of things that I think will help communicate that. I also hope in writing the book that because it's like just a coloring book, really an activity book, that the parents will sit down and read it and learn from the children as they read the story to them, because it is revelatory for most people, I think. And so, yeah, I'll share that with you through some documents. I'll also share my list of what I think are sort of the best soil books to read that run the gamut from David Montgomery's books to Gabe Brown's books and some others. Yeah, they really informed my perspective, and they transformed what I do and why I do it, because now I realize how important this is to all life going forward.
And I think after this conversation, teachers are going to feel that passion and feel that urgency almost. I think after listening to you today, I'm like, oh wow, I've kind of always heard of regenerative farming, but I didn't really feel how important it was until after this conversation. So hopefully we've kind of inspired some teachers to start incorporating this for the next generation into their curriculums and to their passion into their students.
I hope so. And I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to geek out a little bit in terms of my passion, share my passion for the soil. I wish I had learned these lessons earlier. I think it might have changed my career path a little bit, but I'm glad to be able to share my passion with you. And most importantly, I've just been blessed with the opportunity to tell the real heroes' stories, the people who are out on the land doing the hard things, and I'm inspired by them. They give me reason to get up every morning and want to tell more of those stories.
Yeah. Are there any final thoughts for teachers before we move into some kind of fun, quick questions that you wanted to share that we haven't yet covered?
No, just the one that says if we can stop thinking of soil as dirt and thinking of it as life, I think that will be a great gift for humanity is to just realize that this is sunlight, rain, and soil. Without either of those three things, we would not exist. We can control one of them. So we have to learn. And like everything else in life, the more you learn, I think the more it reduces hubris. It expands compassion. It allows us to appreciate diversity. I think the greatest lesson that nature teaches us is the value in diversity. And there's a reason for it. And the diversity of thought is a good one too. It's good to have that. So yeah, I guess that's kind of my takeaway. If you could just take a look at soil and I think it was Da Vinci who said, we know more about the movements of the celestial bodies than we know about the soil beneath our feet. Let's change that.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for that empowering message. And I'm hoping teachers are going to check out those things we'll share below they can use in their classroom and learn a little more for themselves. So we always finish my podcast with some fun, quick questions. The first question is your favorite lunch.
Ham and cheese,
Perfect.
grilled,
A
grilled.
That's even better. A teacher that made a difference in your life.
I would say Professor Thalen at the University of Missouri. He was a history teacher and he made it come alive.
Love it. This one might not apply, but we talk about like your best behavior management tips.
I like to reward good behavior
Yeah.
and hold those up who are doing what they can and sort of hold them up as the heroes they are. And I like to think I try to do that in my day-to-day work. It's shining the spotlight on them and encouraging others to take a similar path.
Yes. And we do that in teaching all the time. So I love that tip. And then last question here is last lesson you taught.
Probably this one.
Okay.
And it is the one that I continue to want to teach. There is a book called First Break All the Rules. It was a management book, and it talks about, there's a principle that a lot of managers, it's like, well, you train people for what you want them to be, right? And so if you need somebody to do something, you train them. And if your training's good enough, they'll become good at that. And they don't. You have to start with what people love. They're sort of pre-wired in a way. And I think my job as a communicator, and I think that's essentially what teachers are communicators too, is to bring out what that passion is and nurture it and try to encourage it. And this book goes on to say that surprisingly, the thing that you love the most is the thing, and the thing that you know the most about is the thing that you have the capacity to know more about, which seems counterintuitive, right? You'd say, well, if I don't know much about this, so I can learn. But what he's basically saying in this book is it's about passion. It's about what you love to do and to find out. And there's the children who are out there who I always thought it was sort of weird that you would go into college and it would say, okay, now what do you want to be? Or now they're asking children to do it earlier, right? Even as early as middle school, you're setting a career path in a lot of ways that you're going to go this way or that way. How can you know if you haven't experienced life? How can you make that decision? I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I'm evolving. We all evolve, and that's part of the joy of learning. And that's what learning really, really does, is it gives you exposure to things that you wouldn't normally find on your own. And it enriches it. To have childlike curiosity is, I think, the greatest gift that one can have through life. And I hope we never lose it.
Yes, I agree. I think teachers feel that same way, which is why a lot of us go into it is to really help students find that passion for learning and for what they want to do as they get older.
It's the greatest gift that can be given, because then they will be prepared for a life of learning. And what a wonderful gift that is.
Yes, 100%. Well, kind of finishing off here, where can my audience find you in terms of your website or things like that? And I'll link that as well below.
Yeah, I'll share that with you too. I've got a couple of different Facebook pages. Ron Nichols Communications is one of my Facebook pages, but also through the Soil Health Academy. You connect with us there. And if you have questions, shoot them to the folks there. It's a small organization, but we're well connected out in the countryside, and we can connect you with soil conservation folks or soil health organizations that are closer to you. And yeah, we need educators to help us help the next generation understand how vital this resource is and to be a part of the solution and the hope that it truly offers. I love the fact that it's not something that is. I used to think that it was just something you either had good soil or bad soil and that was it. And now knowing that we can control and we can create a better world through our management practices is empowering.
Yes, yes. To kind of teach students that they have the power to change not just their world, but their soil. So it's important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. They can be part of it all.
Well, thank you so much, Ron, for being here. I know teachers are going to get a lot of value out of what you shared today, and they're going to love that resource you shared below. That coloring book is going to be so fun for the younger grades, especially. So, thank you again for coming on the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And God bless all the teachers out there for all they do. We need you, and you're an undervalued, underappreciated resource, but not by me.
Thank you, Ron. That means so much.